Family Guy was once known for its sharp writing, inventive humor, and boundary-pushing satire. When the show premiered in 1999, its early seasons, roughly seasons 1 through 6, were praised for combining rapid-fire jokes with coherent storytelling. Each episode balanced absurdity with narrative structure. The characters were exaggerating but had emotional cores. Peter was a goofy but lovable father. Lois was grounded and intelligent. Brian was the philosophical center. Stewie was a brilliantly crafted villain with surprising emotional layers. Even side characters had defined identities that contributed to the humor and the world building.
Vote is actor Jimmy Smits.
Over time, the show focus shifted. Viewers began noticing a change around seasons 8 or 9. One of the most common complaints was that jokes started replacing storylines. Early episodes were joke-heavy but still built around structured plots. There were setups and payoffs. As the series progressed, however, the jokes began to dominate the entire series, often with no narrative glue holding the episode together. Viewers described these episodes as chaotic, with a constant barrage of disconnected gags that left no time for plot development. The most glaring example of this shift is the cutaway gag.
And how long before I can take this out?
Originally, cutaways served as enhancements. They added surreal context or background without disrupting the story's flow. But in later seasons, they became overused and poorly integrated. Instead of enhancing the humor, they often derailed scenes and confused viewers. The frequency increased to the point where entire episodes felt like a string of cutaways, with no coherent storyline in between. The show lost its rhythm, and the unpredictability that once defined it gave way to forced randomness. Another core issue is the decline in character integrity. Peter Griffin, once a dim-witted but well-meaning father, devolved into a violent, sociopathic figure. Earlier versions of Peter made bad decisions, but they were rooted in ignorance, not cruelty. In later seasons, he became emotionally abusive, erratic, and physically aggressive, often without consequences or context. He no longer resembled a flawed human being, but a cartoonishly violent caricature. Lois Griffin also suffered from significant character degradation. Initially portrayed as the level-headed, compassionate member of the Griffin household, Lois was the moral compass of the family. She managed the chaos around her with wit and emotional intelligence. However, in later seasons, her character lost its grounding. She began to mirror Peter's worst traits, becoming erratic, self-centered, and at times equally abusive. Storylines began to feature her engaging in bizarre, uncharacteristic behavior, such as infidelity and reckless parenting, with little to no emotional fallout or development. Brian Griffin's decline is another major reason fans turned against the show. Once a fan favorite for his intellectualism and dry wit, Brian represented reason within chaos. He offered philosophical commentary and emotional nuance, often served as a voice of social critique. As the series progressed, however, Brian became smug, hypocritical, and insufferable. He transformed into a self-righteous character who criticized others while embodying the same flaws. This dissonance between who he was and what he became frustrated longtime viewers. His relationships, particularly with his son Dylan and with Stewie, became hollow and directionless. Stewie, the once evil genius with ambitions of world domination, was another victim of inconsistent writing. Early on, Stewie was a breakout character, a uniquely twisted blend of high intellect, villainy, and hidden vulnerability. His plans to kill Lois, his dynamic with Brian, and his existential struggles made him both hilarious and compelling. Over time, the writers abandoned his core traits. His British accent and evil persona faded, replaced by aimless behavior and nonsensical plots. Rather than developing his character or committing to an arc, the show reduced him to an erratic mix of traits without identity or purpose. Meg Griffin, always portrayed as the family outcast, became a lightning rod for criticism regarding the show's tonal shift. While early seasons treated her with some sympathy and allowed glimpses of complexity, later seasons transformed Meg into nothing more than a punching bag. Physical abuse, humiliation, and sexualized jokes became her only narrative function. The cruelty escalated to a point where viewers began questioning whether the jokes were ever intended to be funny, or merely a reflection of lazy, mean-spirited writing. In the episode Seahorse Seashell Party, Meg finally calls out her family's mistreatment, only to end the episode apologizing for speaking up, reinforcing the status quo. The decay of Family Guy's supporting characters also contributed to the backlash. In earlier seasons, side characters like Quagmire, Joe, and Cleveland brought unique comedic energy. Quagmire was sleazy but eccentric. Joe was a determined and respected police officer despite his disability, and Cleveland had his own subdued humor. Over time, each of them were flattened into one-note gags. Quagmire shifted from innuendo-driven comedic relief to overtly predatory behavior that made viewers uncomfortable. Joe's characterization reduced him to shouting about being in a wheelchair, stripping away the dignity and complexity he once had. Cleveland, after his return from The Cleveland Show, re-entered the series with little reintegration or character depth. The neighborhood dynamic that once added richness to the world of Family Guy became stale background noise. Perhaps the most significant shift was in the show's humor itself. The original Family Guy flirted with controversial topics using wit and layered satire. It challenged norms, tackled taboos, and made bold social commentary, often with a clever twist or moment of self-awareness. The jokes were provocative but crafted to make a point. Over time, this satire developed into blatant offensiveness without any sign of intelligence. The show began punching down, mocking marginalized groups, exploiting sensitive issues, and using trauma as a gag without any substance. One clear example is how the show handled disabilities. Early depictions of Joe respected his strength and humanity, even while making him the subject of the jokes. In later seasons, these jokes lost nuance and turned him into a caricature, defined solely by his wheelchair. Similarly, racial and gender-based jokes began lacking the critical edge they once had. They became lazy shock humor, designed not to expose hypocrisy or spark thought, but simply to provoke and offend. Episodes like Screams of Silence, The Story of Brenda Q, illustrate this tone shift. The episode attempted to depict domestic abuse, but did so with such bleakness and insensitivity that it alienated viewers. The humor was absent, the message was unclear, and the entire tone jarring. Critics noted that the episode lacked both empathy and satire, leaving audiences confused about what they were meant to take away, if anything at all. Another point of frustration among fans is the predictability of the writing. Early seasons of Family Guy thrived on unpredictability. Viewers tuned in expecting to be surprised by absurd twists, rapid-fire humor, and unique storylines. But over time, the show settled into a repetitive structure. Episodes follow a formula. Peter does something outrageous. Lois reacts with disapproval. Stewie and Brian embark on a surreal subplot, and Meg is humiliated. The rule of three joke structure, where the same gag is repeated 3 times in an episode, has become overused to the point of fatigue. What once felt clever now feels like a recycled template. Even when the show attempts self-awareness by making meta-jokes about its own decline, it fails to use that awareness to improve. Jokes about how bad the writing has become or how little the characters have developed don't resonate as clever. They come across as admissions of creative stagnation. Instead of using this self-reflection to evolve, the show doubles down on the same tired routines. Characters don't change. Plotlines reset, and emotional arcs are abandoned as quickly as they begin. This sitcom purgatory creates a sense that nothing matters, making it harder for audiences to invest. The emotional depth that once grounded Family Guy is now nearly absent. Episodes that used to explore identity, family, or morality, such as Brian and Stewie or Road to Rhode Island, have been replaced with hollow absurdity. Moments that once offered brief glimpses of humanity in the chaos are now rare. There's no character growth, no lasting consequences, and very little emotional payoff. What used to feel like intentional episodic resets now feel like careless disregard for continuity and character arcs. Lastly, some fans argue that in phasing out certain edgy material like gay jokes, Family Guy lost its boldness. While offensive jokes are no longer acceptable by modern standards, Family Guy was once known for taking risks with sharp satire. Now the writers appear unsure about how far to push, resulting in jokes that feel sanitized and toothless. Without that edge or meaningful replacement, the show blends into a sea of safe, forgettable content that lacks the voice it once proudly owned. As the show lost its emotional grounding, it also lost the ability to evolve with its audience. Long-running series typically adapt to stay relevant, either by deepening character development, updating their humor, or reflecting changing societal norms. Family Guy did not. It remained frozen in its early 2000s style, While trying to mask that creative inertia with louder jokes and more extreme content, this lack of growth alienated both longtime fans who matured with the show and new viewers expecting substance beneath the irreverence. Many fans point to the show's tonal inconsistencies as another reason for its fall from grace. The comedy swings unpredictably from slapstick to bleak nihilism, often within the same scene. Instead of being edgy and smart, it feels erratic and confused. The series no longer balances absurdity with heart or structure. Instead, it leans heavily on shock value, abuse, sexual violence, racial jokes, not to challenge or critique, but simply to provoke. As a result, viewers feel more discomfort than amusement. Episodes that once served as highlights of animation, creativity, now feel like content fillers. Scenes drag on unnecessarily. Cutaways are inserted without setup. Side characters are used as props rather than personalities. Jokes are rehashed from earlier seasons. And entire plot lines repeat with minimal variation. There is little incentive for audiences to stay invested when originality and care are missing. Ratings reflect this decline as well. In its prime, Family Guy pulled in over 9 million viewers. In recent seasons, those numbers have dipped down below 1 million. Online forums, YouTube comments, and social media threads show widespread disillusionment. Former fans are not just bored, they're disappointed. The common sentiment isn't that the show changed, but that it refused to grow. That refusal turned a once scenic show into a hollow imitation of itself. The most inconsistent criticism can be summed up simply. Family Guy lost its soul. Humor without purpose. Characters without growth. Stories without substance. The series no longer offers clever social commentary, emotional resonance, or even reliable entertainment. What remains is a shell of what it once was. Loud, chaotic, and disconnected from the audience that once fought for its revival. While Family Guy kept getting lazier, American Dad quietly doubled down on weirdness, character depth, and story arcs. And no one embodied that better than Roger, a shape-shifting sociopath with a backstory more twisted than any Griffin family gag.